There are some sounds you never forget. The laughter of your childhood, the voice of someone you loved, and sometimes just a single pair of footsteps. Imagine you're 13 years old. It's your first week at a boarding school, hundreds of kilometers from home. The rains have been falling since sunset, drumming relentlessly against the corrugated iron roofs above the dormitories. The electricity failed hours ago, leaving only darkness and the occasional flash of lightning that turns the room ghostly white for the briefest second. Around you, 50 other boys lie silently in their bunk beds. No one is sleeping because somewhere outside, someone is walking, coy. A sharp heel strikes the concrete floor. Silence, coy. Another step closer. No one whispers. No one moves. Even the older students, who spent the evening laughing and joking, now stare motionless at the ceiling. Then, from the top bunk above you, someone speaks so quietly, you almost don't hear him. Close your eyes. Another voice answers from across the room. Don't look at the door. You don't understand why. You're new. No one has told you the story yet. But every student in that dormitory already knows one thing. If you hear the heels, you pretend you're asleep. Because if she thinks you're awake, she'll stop right beside your bed. Across West Africa, there's a legend that has survived for generations. Students whisper it to one another on their first night in boarding school. Older siblings warn younger ones before they leave home. Teachers dismiss it as childish superstition. Yet somehow, when the lights go out, even many of those teachers avoid walking the corridors alone. They call her Madam Koi Koi. No one agrees on exactly who she was or how she died. Every school tells the story a little differently. Some say she was a mathematics teacher. Others insist she taught English. Some believe she was murdered. Others say her death was nothing more than a tragic accident. But every version begins with one unmistakable sound. Koi, 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 the echo of her red high heels against an empty hallway. Nearly 50 years ago, hidden beyond thick forests and winding dirt roads, stood a boarding school, much like hundreds of others, scattered across the region. Life there was strict. Students woke before sunrise. Morning assembly began with the ringing of a heavy brass bell. Lessons filled the day. Silence filled the night. For months at a time, the school became the students' entire world. It was during one rainy season that a new teacher arrived. Even decades later, former students remembered the day she stepped through the school gates. She carried herself with unusual confidence. Her clothes were immaculate. Her hair was perfectly styled. She wore bright red high heels. They seemed absurd in a place where the roads dissolved into rivers of red earth whenever it rained. But she never took them off. She wore them in the classroom. She wore them during assembly. She wore them while inspecting the dormitories after lights out. Everywhere she walked, koi, koi, koi. At first, the students admired her. Then, they feared her. She believed discipline was everything. Mistakes were punished harshly. A forgotten homework assignment, a late arrival, talking during lessons, even making eye contact when she believed you were being disrespectful. Punishment was swift. The sound that terrified students wasn't the cane, it was the footsteps before it. Because once they heard those heels approaching their desk, they already knew what was coming. Some students claimed she smiled while delivering punishment. Others insisted that wasn't true. Memory changes over time. Fear changes it even faster. But everyone agreed on one thing. The sound of those heels became the sound of dread itself. Months became years. Students graduated. New children arrived. The stories spread. Freshmen learned to recognize the rhythm before they ever saw her. Coy, pause, coy, pause. Some said they could tell how angry she was simply by how quickly she walked. No one wanted to hear those footsteps stop outside their classroom or outside their dormitory room. No one knows exactly what happened. Ask 10 former students, and you'll hear 10 different stories. Some swear a group of senior boys planned an ambush. Others say it began as nothing more than a prank. One version claims she chased students into the darkness. Another insists the students cornered her first. But every story ends in the same place. The old concrete stairwell connecting the dormitories. It was the height of the rainy season. A violent storm had swept across the compound, knocking out the power shortly after evening prep. Without electricity, the entire school disappeared into darkness. Only flashes of lightning lit the corridors, running footsteps, a scream. Then, silence, followed by something echoing through the stairwell. A body striking concrete, again, and again, and again. When the storm finally eased, the teacher lay motionless at the bottom of the stairs. Her neck twisted unnaturally. One of her shoes remained on her foot. The other was gone. Some students claimed panic took over. Others believed the school covered up what happened to protect its reputation. Records from that time were strangely incomplete. Names disappeared. Reports were never filed. Within weeks, it was as though the teacher had never existed at all, except people began hearing footsteps again, not the confident rhythm everyone remembered. Something slower, something broken. Scrape, coy, scrape, coy, as though someone was dragging one barefoot while the other still wore a single red heel. The first reports were dismissed. A nervous student claimed he had heard footsteps outside his dormitory after lights out. The night prefect blamed an overactive imagination. Another student swore he had seen a woman standing beneath the mango trees at dawn wearing only one red shoe. The groundskeeper laughed and said it was probably a visitor from a nearby village, but the stories kept coming. Every year, a new class of students arrived, and every year, the older students repeated the same warning: if you hear the heels, don't look. For years, it remained nothing more than whispered folklore, until David. David was 14 when he arrived at the school. Like every new student, he thought the stories were ridiculous. Ghosts didn't wander school compounds. Footsteps were just footsteps. His mother had laughed when he mentioned Madame Koi Koi before leaving home. People tell stories to scare children into behaving. David believed her. At least, he did, until his third week at school. The rain had finally stopped after 3 days without pause. The night air felt unusually cold. Long after lights out, David woke with the uncomfortable realization that he needed to use the toilet. Rows of bunk beds disappeared into darkness. The older boys were asleep, or so he thought. Trying not to wake anyone, he slipped quietly from his bed. His small flashlight barely cut through the darkness. As he stepped into the corridor, the school was silent. Too silent. Even the insects seemed to have stopped singing. David had only taken a dozen steps when the flashlight flickered. Once, twice, then it steadied. He frowned. The batteries had been replaced only yesterday. Then he heard it. Scrape. Coy. David froze. His heartbeat seemed impossibly loud. He listened. Nothing. He laughed quietly to himself. Probably one of the teachers making rounds. He took another step. Scrape. Coy. Closer. This time. Not walking normally. Dragging. Then striking the floor with a single heel. David switched off his flashlight without thinking. Darkness swallowed him whole. His breathing became shallow. The sound continued. Scrape. Coy. Slow. Deliberate. Coming toward him. He pressed himself against the cold concrete wall. Maybe whoever it was would walk past. Instead, the footsteps stopped. A long silence filled the corridor. David couldn't even hear the wind. Then came something far worse. The slow rattle of a door handle. One room, then another. Another. Someone or something was trying every dormitory door. The footsteps continued. Scrape. Coy. Each stop, bringing them closer. Room by room. Door by door. David finally understood why everyone had gone silent when the story was mentioned. This wasn't a teacher. Teachers called out. Teachers carried flashlights. Teachers didn't drag their feet. His room was only a few meters away. He forced himself to move slowly. At first, then faster, keeping as quiet as he could. He slipped inside and eased the door shut. No one stirred. He climbed into bed and pulled the blanket over his head. His entire body trembled. Outside, the footsteps continued. Scrape. Coy. Until they stopped. Directly outside his door. The handle turned. Slowly. The old hinges groaned as the door drifted open. A wave of freezing air rolled across the room. The smell came next. Wet earth. Rotting flowers, old perfume. David squeezed his eyes shut until they hurt. He remembered the warning. Don't look. The dragging sound entered the room. It moved between the bunks, stopping, listening, waiting. Then it stopped beside David's bed. He felt the mattress sink slightly, as though someone had leaned over him. A cold breath brushed against his ear. Then a woman's voice, so faint it barely sounded human. Not angry, not screaming, almost curious. Have you seen my shoe? David's heart hammered against his ribs. Every instinct begged him to open his eyes, to see what stood beside him. Instead, he buried his face deeper into the pillow. The room remained silent. Seconds stretched into minutes. Then the weight lifted from the mattress. The footsteps returned. Scrape. Coy. Moving toward the door. The cold slowly faded. The smell disappeared. David didn't move until sunlight spilled through the windows. When he finally looked beside his bed, his blood ran cold. Pressed deep into the dusty floor were two marks. One, a muddy footprint. The other, a perfect circular imprint left by the heel of a woman's shoe. No one had entered the room that night. At least, no one living. David never told the story publicly. He only shared it with the boys who slept in that dormitory. Years later, they told younger students. Those students told the next generation. And so, the legend continued. Today, every boarding school seems to have its own version. Some say Madame Koi Koi appears, only during the rainy season. Others believe she walks the corridors whenever the electricity fails. A few insist she isn't searching for revenge at all. They say she's searching for the missing red shoe she lost on the night she died, perhaps. That's why only one heel is ever heard. No one knows, and perhaps no one wants to know, because every legend survives for a reason, not because everyone believes it, but because somewhere, someone experiences something they cannot explain. So if you ever find yourself spending the night in an old boarding school and the lights suddenly go out, listen carefully. If all you hear is rain, you're probably safe. But if the silence is broken by a slow, uneven rhythm, scrape, coy, don't go looking for the source. Don't call out. And whatever you do, don't open your eyes. Because if the stories are true, she isn't searching for the students who wronged her all those years ago. She's searching for the next one. Coy, good night.